Welcome back to First Day Reactions. I am Istari, and I'm here yet again to react to the behind the scenes. And this is the appendices of The Two Towers. So thank you to those of you who have decided to join me yet again. We have been in Middle Earth for quite some time, so I do appreciate you guys deciding to spend your time with me, okay? And so the journey continues. We're just going to go ahead and pick up where we left off. This is... We're all finished with the Fellowship of the Ring, which was remarkable. So we'll see how the Two Towers does, okay? All right, everybody relax in. Let's flow.
Hello, and welcome to the
Peter.
Appendices of the Two Towers. Just like the film itself, we regard this as being the second part of a trilogy, that these documentaries represent an ongoing journey through the making of these films.
Right.
The Two Towers has definitely been the most difficult of the three movies to make. It was difficult from a point of view of a screenplay. It was the hardest of the books to adapt. The shooting itself was long and arduous. The Battle of Helm's Deep, which was shot during long, wet night shoots, was probably one of the most difficult sequences.
Oh, interesting.
We had to deal with the character of Gollum, who we decided was going to be a CGI character.
Would be the most difficult.
And yet he had to be absolutely believable, and so we had to develop new technologies to do that.
Believable.
And the post-production on the Two Towers was also
I can't wait to see what they did with Gollum.
It's a film that we needed to shape and craft in the cutting room more so than the other movies, and we spent so long working on it, I think there were quite a few people that were worried that we weren't going to deliver the film and be able to release it on time.
Oh, very interesting.
Things got kind of stressful.
Yeah,
and you're going to see all that in these documentaries. They're a great way to share with you
excited.
What it really was to make the Two Towers. Now, on this disc, there are 5 documentaries, which have a running time of just over 3 hours.
Okay.
If you want to watch them individually, you can do that. In addition to the documentaries, there's over an hour of extra video material and thousands of stills and production design drawings which you can access through your remote control. For years, we've been making these Lord of the Rings films under very tight security. But the flip side of that are these DVDs, and finally, we get to be able to share all this with you.
Yeah, thank you so
much.
much.
So I really hope you enjoy watching them.
Yes, I will enjoy it. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. The saga continues behind the scenes. That's very interesting that the Two Towers, he would consider that to be the most difficult to film.
There was a conversation that took place between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, the creator of the Chronicles of Narnia, in which they were talking about the fact that they felt a frustration that they couldn't pick up and read the kind of books of stories that they liked to read.
Okay.
And they both came to this conclusion that in the end, maybe they had to write the books they wanted to read.
At first sight, it might seem odd that C.S. Lewis and Tolkien became friends. There was much about them that was different. Lewis, for example, was an atheist, and Tolkien was a very devout Roman Catholic.
Oh, interesting.
They were also very different physically. Lewis was a big man. He had a booming voice. Tolkien was much slighter, much quieter, much more of a perfectionist than Lewis. And an informal group of literary friends grew out of the friendship between Lewis and Tolkien.
That was the Inklings. The Inklings were the sort of club, informal club of people of like mind.
Okay.
C.S. Lewis, Charles Williams, Tolkien himself,
we're like-minded.
Several others. They used to meet
around Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings.
They shared a love of tobacco and a love of ale and good food, just like hobbits, in fact. But they also shared an understanding of language and literature.
Well, they used to meet roughly twice a week. On Thursday evenings, they would meet often in Lewis's rooms in Magdalen College. And these were literary gatherings where they would read work in progress from manuscripts they were writing and get instant feedback and criticism, sometimes quite harsh.
And in the case particularly of Lewis and Tolkien,
I couldn't take harsh
shared
criticism,
a spiritual quest, an understanding of what it was, if anything, that motivated and lay behind the ticking of the universe.
One of the factors which united the group was a shared experience of fighting in the First World War. They saw this impersonality in the way that warfare had become increasingly mechanized.
And people who'd been through that, they needed, I think, a new explanation of evil. And they hadn't got one.
I think there's no question about the dead marshes where all the great battles were fought are definitely taken from his experiences in World War I.
Nobody goes through that experience of battle
Look at Gimli.
Without having to
all
ask all
hair.
the questions. When you see men that you like, admire, respect die around you.
Yeah.
No one who's been even anywhere near that cannot but ask real questions like, what am I fighting for? Is there a God?
Right.
So all these writers, I think, and I call them traumatized authors, they've all undergone severe trauma of one kind or another.
How can you
They
not?
have to write their own explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And strangely, but pretty consistently, they cannot do it by writing realistic fiction. They have to write something which is in some way or other fantastic.
Fantastic, yeah.
One of the deep ironies about Tolkien as a writer is that he wasn't a professional writer in the usual sense of the word.
We know
What
a
do you
lot
mean?
more than we did about the way that The Lord of the Rings was written, and actually it's not the way you'd have expected at all.
He didn't send a synopsis for The Lord of the Rings off to a publisher, hoping that they might come back and say, oh, send us a couple of sample chapters and we'll see how it goes.
He wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing very much for himself. And he had no sense of the book as a commercial prospect.
Did we learn that in the first video? That he was only writing for himself?
You do get the impression with the Fellowship of the Ring that Tolkien set about writing the story not knowing where it was going. You know, when he started writing about Hobbiton and leaving Hobbiton, he didn't know it. He was making it up as he went along.
I think that's very
So
interesting
it
that
like
he
the
was
waves coming up the
writing
beach,
just for
really.
himself. He didn't have any
Each
idea
wave
of
got a
it
bit further.
reaching.
But they also
the
went
mainstream.
back all the way, as it were, to the starting point.
So even though his initial inspiration came from the language and from history and literature and the things that he was interested in as an academic, the creative process cannot be pinned down in such a simple or meticulous way.
I think the creation of The Lord of the Rings was actually an embarrassment to the people around Tolkien.
What?
You know, here was a man who was a learned man in a learned academic institution who might have been expected to write about these subjects in which he was extremely knowledgeable in a way that was acceptable to the academic world. Papers, a book about myth, a book about language.
Yeah,
but
I can see that.
What they were not seeing, in my opinion, was the fact that he was reviving all that more or less dried up, written in stone material.
You know, C.S. Lewis immediately saw the scope and the brilliance of what Tolkien was doing. I mean, that phrase, it's the best phrase ever used to describe The Lord of the Rings, that it came like lightning out of a clear sky.
At the time that it arrived in
sky.
the George Allen and Unwin offices, it really was one of a kind. There was nothing like it around.
I often think what it must have been like to be Sir Stanley Unwin when The Lord of the Rings, so to speak, arrived on his desk. You know, back in 1937, he asked for a sequel to The Hobbit, 120,000 words aimed at 10 to 12-year-olds, and what he gets is The Lord of the Rings. It's kind of 500,000 words long. It has 100 pages of appendices.
Wait, it's 500,000 words long?
Innumerable allusions to things we don't know anything about, and it's full of remarks in languages which nobody knows, which, may I point out, Tolkien often didn't bother to translate.
Oh, I didn't know that. There's no translations?
Standing thinking, well, why didn't he just do what I told him?
For the different languages?
Would a modern publisher conceivably take on this enterprise? Of course they wouldn't. They'd tell him it was not structured like a proper novel.
Right.
Important characters weren't developed. They didn't have a through development in the story. They would tell him that there were too many repeats of ideas, that the beginning of the book is far longer than the end of the book, where the real story happens.
There are great gaps of no action at all, really. A great deal of talk. Council of Elrond is a good example.
I love the Council of Elrond.
The ring.
She was like, no action.
Nothing happens in it. You have.
That's so funny.
I always lose count.
Nothing happens in
talking, but it's 20 odd. Most of them have not been introduced before. And
well, I love what they
like
put on
nothing
screen.
so much as a very badly chaired committee meeting, which gets away from Elrond all the time.
As an editor now, I would certainly be wishing to take a blue pencil to that section of the book. As a writer, it would fill me with horror.
I think, as I say, a professional author would not have done it like that. He wouldn't have trusted his audience to follow him. And he would certainly not have said, oh, okay, I'll do the Fall of Isengard in flashback. You just couldn't miss out a big scene like that. You know, if you did Creative Writing 101, they'd teach you not to do things like that.
Creative
but
Writing
Tolkien
101.
did it.
The Two Towers as a narrative is, well, it's actually two books.
Oh, is it? It's 2 books?
Almost artificially made into one.
Oh.
Those people that read the book will know that the book is like divided into 2 distinct storylines. One is the storyline through Rohan, and then the Frodo, Sam, Gollum story is separate. And Tolkien almost just like puts the first half of the book in the second half and doesn't really intercut.
So you have
really?
The story of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, pursuit of the Uruk-hai, attempt to save Merry and Pippin's meeting with Treebeard, the return of Gandalf. All of that is one half. And then you go backwards in time and suddenly you're with Frodo and Sam way back at the moment again where the Fellowship is broken and they've been in the hills of Emil for a while.
Okay.
That's a very difficult way to tell a story.
Yeah.
Because you are losing whole character groups for 150 and 200 pages at a time.
Oh, it could have been a very dangerous method. It could have lost a great deal of momentum and power out of the story to suddenly fracture it in this sort of way.
What?
But in fact, I think it works in Tolkien's favour.
I think what he created very powerfully was a sense of realism. And realism comes from not knowing what's going on and not knowing what to do next.
Right, you don't know what's going on with anyone.
You actually get to follow different threads of story through the book at this point. Creates a great deal of tension in the narrative. It makes you speed up your reading. You want to know what's happened to the other characters. It really gives you much greater range than you would have if you were to just have a linear story.
So good.
He did things which a professional would not have dared to do.
Okay, that's what they meant by that,
worked.
that he wasn't
Professionals don't know everything.
Writer.
Sometimes inspired amateurs know something.
It's now looked upon as the fantasy trilogy, a book that spawned an entire industry, as if nothing existed before The Lord of the Rings, and that everybody has copied it since. It's not quite as simple as that.
The fact is that Tolkien wrote a book that was just too damn big to be published in one volume at the time.
Yeah.
But in the post-war years, when there was an extraordinary paper shortage and paper was very, very expensive, it would have been an enormous undertaking for publishers who had published this book in one volume.
It would have been too costly,
Yeah.
and they would have had to price it so high that nobody would have bought it. So much against Tolkien's wishes, it was split into 3.
It had to be.
And therefore created
I'm surprised he resisted that. Them splitting it into 3 books.
What we had terrible trouble with is the titles of the 3 subsidiary parts.
Oh, really?
When we persuaded him to divide it. Because we realized that you couldn't have just Lord of the Rings Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. It's too dreary.
Oh.
So we wanted
why not?
a separate title for each one.
I'm glad they chose
Tolkien
separate titles, but I would have taken
it seemed a
Part
natural
1, Part 2,
title
Part
for
3.
the first volume because it was the